This week in games, we recap the FTC versus Microsoft lawsuit. Pokemon Go developer Niantic lays off 200 people. Gollum Devs are out of the game-making business alongside our review of Final Fantasy XVI. This is the Two Penny Gamescast. What's poppin', players? Welcome back to the Two Penny Gamescast, episode 154. I am your host, Tavin Bothel, here with my good friend and co-host. Say hello to the people, Connor Elliott.
How are you chatters doing?
Whoa, what's up, chatters? Hey, Connor.
Well, commenters, I guess if this is on YouTube, since we're only talking to Twitch right now.
To the Twitch stream down below, that is correct. Here we go. I gotta move some things over here. Connor, how has your week been, my friend?
It's been filled with a Final Fantasy XVI, which has been enjoyable.
There we go.
I won't say any more than that, because we will be doing a review of that in this episode.
Yes, at the end of this episode, we will have our Final Fantasy XVI review, finally, for you, ladies and gentlemen. Let us know down in the comments how you felt about that. Or you can just head over to youtube.com/@2pennygames and check out the breakout review, where, it's the same review. It's just, broken out for your quick viewing pleasure. I'm your host, Tavin Bothel. This is the Two Penny Gamescast, where each and every week, me and Connor come to you with the new news you need to know concerning the video game industry. We come to you each with two topics, two pennies, if you will, and we give you our 2 cents on them. Ring off in the comments 2 pennies of your own, some topics, pieces of news, or just general questions you have that we can ring off and have your 2 pennies represented here on the show. You can catch us live every Sunday at 4 p.m. Central Time, twitch.tv/2pennygames, or just catch the VOD at youtube.com/@2pennygames, or mainstream podcast services of your choice, Monday at 8 a.m. Central Time. We also go live on Mondays with Phil, who is the host of our Piggy Bank show, which goes live on Saturdays. He goes live on Mondays. I believe at 2 p.m. is his time right now, but it's sort of in flux and stuff. And then I'm trying to stream as well over at twitch.tv/2pennygames as much as I can. But, it's a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on. We're very, very busy. Catch our new episode of the Two Penny Game Club, your monthly video game book club in which we all sit down and review a game of yore and rank it against all the other games we've recorded on the show. Or reviewed on the show, rather. This next week, we will be doing Yakuza 0. So make sure you keep an eye out for that next Sunday, 4 p.m. Central Time, twitch.tv/2pennygames. Connor, we got a busy week, man. Lot of dense topics going on. And so it's only right that we go ahead and we get into our first topic of the day. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It's FTC V Microsoft time, baby. We got a lot of news, a lot of different stuff happened this week. It was a big court case, new headlines happening every single week. We couldn't find one that was encapsulating all of it. So I'm taking The Verge's article by Tom Warren here. He did an excellent little summarized breakup of every single day. So I'm going to kind of just scroll through this as quickly as I can and sort of like just hit the keynotes and sort of the conversation pieces. Connor, do you think it's best if we stop day by day and talk about it? Or do you think it's best if we sort of like get it all in and then go back?
It's probably going to be filled with legal mumbo jumbo. So I think maybe just taking it each day.
Each day?
Probably the easiest way to do it, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, let's start with day one here, which was one of the big headlines, of course, in which there was an email shown off where Sony higher-ups, let me find the exact day here. This was shared by Matt Booty. There was an actual, quote, but I think it was in the breakout piece. Mm-hmm. Here it is. Okay, so this was an exchange between Jim Ryan and Chris Deering, which are heads of PlayStation. And basically, when they heard about the Activision acquisition, they really weren't worried about it. The main thing that they were worried about is Call of Duty. We all knew this. They were scared about Call of Duty. This was something nobody was worried about. But Ryan said in an email to Jim Ryan, in an email to Chris Deering, quote, "It's not about an exclusivity play at all. They're thinking bigger than that, and they have the cash to make moves like this." Ryan wasn't concerned about Call of Duty exclusivity because he had spoken to Activision CEO Bobby Kotick, Xbox chief Phil Spencer, and even had reassurances from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. Sony was also just about to announce its plan to acquire Bungie just days after Ryan's email exchange. Quote, "We have some good stuff cooking," said Ryan, referring to Bungie. Quote, "I'm not complacent, and I'd rather this hadn't happened, but we'll be okay. We'll be more than okay." The email exchange set the tone for the day, with Microsoft claiming, quote, "Sony has known all along we'll stand by our promise," and that the PlayStation maker was lobbying against the deal to, quote, "protect its dominant position in the market." And we'll see this being sort of a common thread throughout the entire court case, is just Call of Duty, its standings, and how PlayStation can stay on top. There was also at some point in the day, I'm gonna just layer in a bunch of ancillary facts that were making some headlines and so forth. I don't know if it was on the first day or one of the later days, but at some point, due to poor, what is it when they black out lines in documents?
Classify.
Yeah, due to poor blacking out of lines for classified documents and so forth, we were able to scrounge up some details about some interesting things, such as both Horizon Forbidden West and Last of Us Part 2 costing over $200 million to make for PlayStation Studios, and a lot of great stuff Microsoft was trying to buy everybody, man, between Sega, Square Enix, Zynga, a whole bunch of people. If it looked like it was possible, Microsoft was trying to get something popping off. So here we go. First day, they're really just talking about, hey, we're not really worried about Call of Duty being exclusive. And then there was some talk about, where does day 2? Okay. And that was the most of day 1. Connor, anything really of note here? No, right?
Not to me, yeah.
It's all about Call of Duty. PlayStation didn't think Call of Duty was going to go fully exclusive. Microsoft was going to keep its word and say Call of Duty can still be multi-platform, so on and so forth. Not a big shocker there. I think we were all kind of on that. Day 2 is where things got interesting. Phil Spencer took the stand for hours and covered a whole bunch of stuff in its competition with Sony. Basically, just the big headline of the day was Xbox, has submitted and said Sony won the console war. They're done with the console war. Mumbo jumbo. Wipe our hands from it. We lost. We don't care anymore. Is what they were saying, of course. And then this is when we heard about all of the other possible acquisitions. So let's stop there, Connor, and talk real quick about that. First off, Microsoft has lost the console war. Agree? Disagree?
I think everyone can pretty much say with certainty that that's true. It's kind of been in the public knowledge for a while now. It's just now they finally admitted it. Yeah, they lost it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, was it ever something to admit? And this is something that Phil Spencer had even mentioned in the interview with Kinda Funny Games on their Xcast, where he was like, dude, we're running third. And there's a big gap between us. We're just trying to make great games and entertain our players and our gamers and stuff like that. We don't really care about this console war nonsense. And yeah, they don't really care about this console war nonsense. This is why, they've been putting their stuff on PC all the time, with everything. This is why they have great deals like Game Pass. This is why they don't really care if you buy an Xbox. They care if you buy into the Xbox platform, which is something that, of course, they would rather you buy an Xbox than not buy an Xbox. Of course, I'm not going to say not, but they're more interested in getting your money in any other way than getting you with the box, which is where Sony and arguably even Nintendo have been for the last 3 decades.
Yeah, they kind of just screwed themselves over with that initial Xbox One announcement, and then PlayStation was able to, because before then it was the Xbox 360 versus the PS3. Xbox 360 kind of was the one that I would say came out on top. If you could declare a winner, more people seem to play that, especially because the online scape has started coming into play.
It definitely started stronger. Xbox definitely had a better as you mentioned, with the multiplayer and the online services and so forth. The 360 definitely had the better platform like that. If you look at sales numbers, the PlayStation 3 did outsell the Xbox. I would say the more meaningful games were on PlayStation 3, with a couple of exceptions such as Halo. But I think overall the conversation was dominated by 360.
Not anymore.
And then the talk of all the things being bought up, Connor. Sega, Square Enix, Sega immediately coming out and saying, hey, no, we are not looking to be bought right now. We're cool. So, and I'm sure Xbox had thrown a bunch of things out to everybody, and Activision Blizzard is the one that came back to them. Otherwise, they'd probably be buying Square Enix. They'd probably be buying Sega. They'd probably be buying Zynga and all these other things. But I think now that they have Activision Blizzard and they have all this controversy around them and all these court cases, I think this is probably going to be the end of Xbox acquisitions for a while. Does any of that interest you, Connor?
I'm just happy we're not going to have to cover any more of their acquisition of Activision Blizzard. I don't think I could take them doing something else. So
well, we're not done with it yet, Connor. It's still happening.
We're not. I know.
We've got at least until the week of July 18th, in which Microsoft has to close this deal, or they got to pay $3 billion in fees to Activision Blizzard, which I'm sure they do not want to do. That would be a lot of wasted time and effort.
Money, more importantly.
Oh, it was also noted that Microsoft specifically acquired Bethesda after learning that Starfield might become a PlayStation exclusive. That's kind of interesting that was something on the table with Bethesda, as they were thinking about, and you can kind of see the domino pieces there. Deathloop was PlayStation exclusive for a year. And it would kind of make sense that, they would pay Bethesda in order to get Starfield, their next big, gigantic game, exclusive as well. At least for a limited time. I think the Bethesda acquisition is still Microsoft's smartest acquisition because it got them huge amounts of talent, huge amounts of clout with Bethesda game software, and arguably the biggest game of the year in Starfield, coming only to Xbox and PlayStation Studios. Which at some point, Pete Hines from Bethesda took the stand and said, hey, listen, if Xbox had not made Starfield exclusive, Starfield would not be coming out this year because it just takes too long to make these games work on all these different platforms. Because they were able to focus, Starfield is coming out this year.
Been a long time coming. Moving
on to day 3. Day 3 included testimony from Sony PlayStation chief Jim Ryan and an NVIDIA executive and economic experts for the FTC and Microsoft. We got to hear more about the bombshell email, Sony's thoughts on Game Pass, and some inside baseball on the contract negotiations between Sony and Microsoft over Call of Duty. A lot of that is basically them just kind of arguing of how, this is where the numbers came in. I don't think this is a very interesting day, personally. This is where a lot of the numbers and things came in. This is where we got sort of the budget ideas of what was going on for Sony first-party games, and sort of the different dealings between cloud streaming and xCloud and how all of that works. The FTC really hammering Microsoft, talking about things such as how Xbox claims xCloud is really more of a feature than it is a market of business, and FTC is arguing that no, Xbox clearly has more ambitious goals for cloud streaming when it comes to video games and is working to become a monopoly in that market. This is really their strongest argument against the acquisition, is that with all of these games coming exclusively to Xbox or Xbox cloud streaming, then it would suddenly make the entire market focused on that. Between Call of Duty, between Diablo, between Starfield, between Bethesda games, between Xbox first-party games, Xbox has such a lead if the cloud streaming service were to ever take off into a mainstream way. However, I would argue you're looking at over a decade before that happens. Now, I could be wrong. Technology moves fast, but I can't imagine within the next decade we have internet services strong enough, we have broadband available wide enough to everybody in order for cloud streaming to be a prime pillar of Xbox business. Connor, agree, disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I know much about cloud gaming or what these ambitions would be specifically, but at least the FTC's looking more in what can come down the line as a result of this Activision Blizzard deal, rather than just how it currently affects the market today. So, I've kind of at this point taken on this blasé attitude towards the Activision Blizzard deal going through or not going through. I'm just kind of interested to see the end result of what happens, but at least the FTC is doing their job for once.
trying to break it up where they can. Day 4 of 5. We're almost through it all, ladies and gentlemen. Day 4 was a big one, says The Verge. Activision CEO Bobby Kotick took the stand to discuss Call of Duty on Switch and the history of Activision. Microsoft Satya Nadella then appeared in the afternoon to answer questions on Microsoft's cloud ambitions. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It wasn't day 3 that we talked about cloud. It was day 4, but we've covered that, so we'll move on. We also heard from NVIDIA's Jeff Fisher briefly and Microsoft's economic experts, Dr. Dennis Carlton. So basically, all of this was focused on Call of Duty. This was a big Call of Duty day. How does Microsoft and Activision plan on getting Call of Duty onto as many platforms as, because remember, they've been making all these 10-year contracts with everybody saying, hey, we will bring Activision Blizzard games to your platform. Switch being the prime example of that. And the FTC kind of hammered on that, asking a lot of questions on how you're able to bring Call of Duty to a Nintendo platform when Call of Duty is this cutting-edge technology, high-fidelity franchise, and Nintendo consoles famously, or infamously rather, are always behind the curve in terms of technology. And basically the answer was, well, we'll have to downgrade graphics and change assets and so forth. So then the FTC argued, well, then Nintendo players are not getting the same game. They're getting a different game. And therefore, you're still being exclusive. You're still, playing it like a monopoly and hurting consumers in that way. That sounds a little bit like my grandpa doesn't understand video games, but okay. Because just because it looks a little lesser, just because, a lot of the effects aren't there, doesn't mean it's not the same game. I'm sure mechanically it's going to play the same. Guess what? Call of Duty has played the same for over a decade. There's really not been any major, strives in that franchise, major differences in that franchise. And through cloud streaming, we've seen the Nintendo Switch be able to handle some titles that are quite demanding. You think of, how the Kingdom Hearts trilogy is available through cloud streaming. Control, Remedy's last big game, is available through cloud streaming on the Switch and so forth. The Switch can't natively play Control in its in the state that it's in, but through cloud streaming we can. So that kind of changes the dialogue here, which again centers around that cloud streaming argument that we were talking about. Connor, how are you feeling about all this?
My whole take on this, I just don't know what to say anymore. I quite frankly don't.
It is a bit of like,
really
all right, yeah, sure. It is some
Yeah.
he say, she say, but this is the point of the whole case, is that there is some back and forth going on here and some arguments of what are Microsoft's intentions here. Day 5 was the final day in which everyone gave their closing arguments, and this is where you can probably get a really good idea of where this case is going to fall, because a decision has not been made yet. It will be made soon. Judge Jacqueline Scott Corley took the opportunity to reflect. Would she even be sitting here, she mused, if Sony had signed a Call of Duty deal with Microsoft? And that's a good point. And it was a part of a series of tough questions Judge Corley had for the FTC. The grilling centered on why consumers would be harmed if Microsoft acquired Activision Blizzard, and particularly on how many PlayStation players would switch to Xbox if Activision's key game actually disappeared. The FTC has relied largely on Sony, the market leader in consoles, to back up its theory on harm to competition if Microsoft were to make Call of Duty exclusive to Xbox or sabotage the PlayStation version. It's a theory that has already been rejected by most regulators worldwide, including the European Commission and even the Competition and Market Authority in the UK. And then finally, overall, that we're still waiting on Judge Corley to make a decision on the testimonies and so forth, and that will happen in the coming days. So I'm sure we'll have a quick update for you next week. But as for right now, the FTC v Microsoft courtroom battle is over, and we will be seeing sort of an end to this very, very soon. And then hopefully by the end of the month, we'll be able to put all of this behind us.
Mm-hmm. So with all of this that just came out, where do you think it's going to land at this point? I'm kind of leaning into them giving the deal the go-ahead as opposed to blocking it right now, since it seems like all of the arguments that Sony's brought forward are kind of just like, well, sounds like you're just bitching. It seems like everyone's take on it. Well, I think they're ultimately going to rule in favor of Microsoft in this Activision Blizzard deal.
I agree with you. I don't think I mean, we've said this on the podcast several times now. It just doesn't seem like there's a strong enough argument from the opposition side, from the FTC side, from Sony's side to not let this deal go through. The simple fact of the matter is, behind the scenes, they're having conversations of how much will this really affect us, and no one really seems to think it's going to affect them that much. Now, of course, everyone would rather everything go their own way. Like, PlayStation would rather this deal not go through. Of course they would. But at the same time, Sony knows that they don't make all of their money off of Call of Duty. They make a good amount of money from Call of Duty. And they also know that they can still have Call of Duty on their platform. They know Microsoft doesn't necessarily want it to be exclusive. Not entirely, at least. And I think, honestly, by the end of all of this, this would have just been a big, major headache. I think the only real danger of this is the precedent it sends. And I've said this before, where if the courts allow this deal to go through, then Sony could counter right immediately back with a Square Enix deal. Or EA could even be on the table. Ubisoft could be on the table. Anyone could be on the table. Because this deal is so big and so massive and so large, and Call of Duty means so much to these platform holders, that if this one goes through, all of the other ones can arguably go through. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to have long, drawn-out court battles like this, but this sets a precedent that I think could be dangerous. However, taking into account this single case, all the arguments that have been made, the fact that even with this acquisition, Xbox still is not holding more first-party studios than PlayStation. Xbox is arguably running third behind the PlayStation and the Switch. So it's just a matter of like, well, I mean, if someone was going to take it, it would be Xbox.
Mm-hmm. Guess we'll have to just finally be waiting and seeing for the last time.
God, I hope it's the last time, but I doubt it will be. But, Connor, we got to move on to topic number 2, our second penny of the day, my second penny of the day. Coming in from Mobile Syrup, from Bradley Shankar, Pokemon Go dev Niantic lays off hundreds and cancels Marvel game. Here we go. Niantic canceled, Pokemon Go maker Niantic is laying off 230 employees and canceling multiple games as a part of reorganization. Niantic's canceled game includes NBA All World, which launched on mobile earlier this year, and the upcoming Marvel World of Heroes. Additionally, Niantic is shutting down a studio in Los Angeles. In a statement, John Hank, the CEO of the San Francisco-based mobile game developer, attributed the moves to, quote, internal and external factors, including global inflation. Quote, in the years since Pokemon Go's launch, the mobile market has become crowded, and changes to the App Store and the mobile advertising landscape have made it increasingly hard to launch new mobile games at scale, Hank wrote. He also admitted that the initial revenue surges Niantic saw in the early days of the pandemic led it to ramp up spending on new projects and employees, but expenses have since grown exponentially. Indeed, Omidia analyst Guillermo Escofet estimated last year Pokemon Go's revenue dropped nearly 50% in 2022, while the broader mobile AR game market saw a 20% decline in revenue. Overall, global spending on mobile games dropped a reported 5% last year, according to analysts from Data.ai. Going forward, Hank says supporting Pokemon Go will remain the company's top priority, while also waiting to increase our focus on building for the emerging class of MR devices and future AR glasses. The developer is also set to release Monster Hunter Now with Capcom in September, on top of supporting Pikmin Bloom and the recently released Period Dot. So, Connor, 230 employees have lost. 230 employees have lost their jobs. Marvel game canceled. NBA game shut down. Niantic, famous for Pokemon Go, and many other of these AR running around the world capturing things games out, which we have seen quite a surge in since Pokemon Go. Not going the best. What are your thoughts here?
Generally, I remember when Pokemon Go came out. That was a phenomenon at the time. Over the time, it just kind of became less and less popular. I am very aware that it has a very strong group of loyal players who consistently go out there and catch new Pokemon. But it seems like with all of their eggs in that one basket, it was only going to be really continuing. The company was going to be continuing as it has been for so long. Obviously, they have a lot of other things in the works, but those haven't come out yet. So it's unfortunate, but thankfully, I don't think it's like a lot of the other ones where it's a bunch of mishandling and mismanagement.
I disagree.
Results.
I disagree.
You do?
I think this is a huge mishandling and mismanagement. The simple fact of the matter is that Niantic was a smaller team that blew up because of Pokemon Go's success. But you have to think about the IP. Pokemon. Gotta catch them all. It inherently makes sense for the type of game that they're creating with this AR, run around the world, walk around, capture things, all of this, that, and the third. Look at the other examples they have. NBA? What? I'm going to capture players? That just doesn't work. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. Especially like if you want to talk about the percentage of NBA players who are black, to capture them is a little weird, a little concerning, but you know that's a different idea altogether.
But Tavin,
come on, it's more like collecting cards than anything else. Yeah, it's more like collecting cards.
It seems more like
okay, but that is inherently. I hear you. That is inherently a niche within a niche. Like, how many people do you know are baseball fans? Now, how many of those fans collect baseball cards?
Yeah, I'm not arguing that. I was just saying it's not the rhetoric you were trying to spit there.
And this is Phil from the Peanut Gallery. It's just the simple idea of capturing or collecting or all of this, and then again, I was saying it's a small thing. It's not like the main thing. It's weird. It's a weird thing to do.
I mean, it certainly is. It's when I think of NBA, I wouldn't think, oh, you got to go do the Pokemon Go style and capture NBA players or whatever it is. The concept basically was. It's very strange. It seems like they're kind of just capitalizing off big names at this point because upcoming Marvel World of Heroes, which makes more sense. But then you have the Marvel, the superhero craze that's still going on, capitalizing off that as well. The Monster Hunter now.
Yeah, the Marvel one arguably could have worked a little bit better, but obviously they just can't do it because of their failure. And from what I hear from Pokemon Go players is that they've like heavily monetized the hell out of Pokemon Go in recent days to where like it's just not nearly as fun to play as it used to be. Monster Hunter I could see kind of working in that way, like go out, hunt the monsters or whatever. I just don't think it would be as fun as like collecting Pokemon. Like Pokemon, like inherently based off the IP, we've seen it work in so many different mediums. That idea of gotta catch them all works with card games, video games, TV shows, and games like Pokemon Go here, where it's like, yeah, go out and be the Pokemon trainer, go and collect them. So it's really a matter of like they expanded too quickly, too hastily, and they kept trying to chase what they already had with Pokemon Go, where they should have set their standards much lower, maybe developed a different type of game entirely, and figured out a better IP to associate themselves with than the NBA, than Marvel, than maybe even Monster Hunter, and definitely not Pikmin. Who wants a Pokemon Go styled Pikmin game? I don't think anybody does, and Pikmin isn't big enough to justify this type of game. So yeah, I think Niantic just immediately jumped the gun on a lot of different deals and spent way more and just took a lot of bad deals. They did not think long term.
And now they're certainly paying the price for it. That's a lot of people to lose their job and a whole studio to be shut down. That's at the very least, the company's not going under completely. So not as many people lost their jobs as could have.
Yeah.
In theory, but and I do agree with you now. More, it's like, yeah, it was mismanagement, but at least not gross mismanagement, not just bad business decisions, which are going to be inevitable in this kind of in any industry. And Niantic's just the recent victim of that.
Yeah, I feel like it was more or less a chasing of greed, like, to me, where it was just like, let's get another one, let's get another hit, let's get another, world changing event, because everyone was into Pokemon Go when it launched, annoyingly so. It was very frustrating. But you look back on that and you go, listen, that was lightning in a bottle, man, and you can't catch it twice.
They're certainly not catching it again unless some miracle happens and they can be back on top, so to speak.
They gotta catch all the IP.
They're not going to be doing that, it seems like, though. Can't even catch 2 other ones.
Moving on to topic number 3. Connor, your first penny of the day, sir. Take it away, my friend.
Well, we got an article here from GameSpot talking about a game related to one of the best franchises of all time, Lord of the Rings. To be one of the worst games in recent years, Gollum. Gollum Studios' next Lord of the Rings game canceled. Dev no longer making games at all. This is from Eddie Makuch. Daedalic was developing another Lord of the Rings game, but it's been canceled. Daedalic Entertainment, the German developer behind the Lord of the Rings Gollum, is undergoing many changes following the poor reception to the game earlier this year. The studio has canceled a new Lord of the Rings game that was in development, and in fact, Daedalic will no longer make games at all. Going forward, Daedalic will be a publisher only. The company said it has, quote, promising releases set for release this financial year. Quote, even though the Lord of the Rings Gollum did not live up to the expectations we had for the game, we are very grateful for the opportunity and the learning experience it brought us, the studio said in a statement. As for the new Lord of the Rings game, that is being canceled. Daedalic said only that this follow-up will be discontinued. It is unknown if this was a sequel to Gollum or a game focusing on a different element of Middle-earth. Before this, Daedalic management said it was hoping to explore a different part of the fantasy universe if it made another Lord of the Rings game. Daedalic received some funding from Germany's Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Protection, and Daedalic confirmed its plans to the government some time ago. As a result, all of these developments, Daedalic is cutting an unspecified number of positions. The studio said it will support departing developers with assistance in finding new work, quote, within our network, end quote. Daedalic is owned by the French company Nacon. Heard that on the show here before. A difficult break, but also a new beginning in the already long history of Daedalic Entertainment, the company said. Daedalic was founded in 2007 and is known for point-and-click titles like the Deponia series. While Daedalic is no longer making new games, the studio has at least one further patch in development for Gollum to help get the game in a better state. While Daedalic's next Lord of the Rings game has been canceled, there are a handful of upcoming titles in the works, including an untitled game from Weta, Lord of the Rings Return to Moria, and Lord of the Rings MMO from Amazon. This game failed so badly, and it was so terrible, that they're just changing their entire mission for how they're making games going forward. This is pretty impressive, all things considered. It's sad in a way, because people lost their jobs, but I just don't know how this game really came out in the state that it did. Buggy, looking terrible, playing terrible from what I've heard about it. I don't know what they were doing. This is one of those things that we thought had kind of stopped happening to the degree it had. Obviously, we have a lot of, when games get released nowadays, they can have rocky starts, Cyberpunk, Jedi Survivor. But usually at a certain point, those things get fixed because the core game isn't messed up. It's just that something happened during the release cycle that caused it to be that way upon release. But this game just obviously was never going to succeed, no matter if they delayed it a month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe even a year. I don't know how they would have gotten this game in proper state to be good at all. It just looked that bad.
I just want to know how you can call yourself the channel's resident Lord of the Rings fan, but you can't pronounce Gollum correctly.
What I said.
You said Gollum.
I'm
just busting your chops.
You got me there.
No, I mean,
you got me.
I agree with you. And you've mentioned it a couple of times on shows. I don't know, through Reacts or through the Gamescast itself or Piggy Bank or where, but you've mentioned it several times where, like, this IP is just being super mishandled. Like, nobody's doing a good job at doing it, whether it's TV shows, whether it's films, or whether it's, video games. There just has not been a good entry in Lord of the Rings in quite some time. and even the good ones have arguably been marred in controversy. You look back at the last Shadow of War, I believe was the game's title,
Yep.
and it was criticized heavily for its microtransactions in the game, which were concerning. And of course, WB copyrighting the Nemesis system, which was one of the true great innovations of the Shadow of Mordor game, and we just have never seen it come back since because of this reason. So yeah, it's unfortunate that Lord of the Rings fans can't catch a break. It's unfortunate that these people lost their jobs, but I mean, based off of the level of quality, I think this is probably the smart move for this dev studio is, hey, guys, all right, let's move you on to something else because this just isn't working out for you.
But then that leaves the question of, are they going to be a good publisher? I don't think this really gives me many hopes for whatever games they're going to be publishing in the future if they couldn't oversee their own game.
I mean, we can only hope, right? I mean, Lord of the Rings Return to Moria looked way better than Gollum ever looked.
Oh, yeah, it did.
So
the concept of it is already more interesting on its own face.
Right.
So,
yeah, but I mean, anything Amazon published, I'm going, oof, okay, we'll see. Because what was the other MMO Amazon published? What, like last year, 2 years ago? New World or something like that?
New World. Brave New World, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. And, people seem to enjoy it a little bit, but it just didn't quite take off.
It was a run-of-the-mill MMO, which you have to do more than just be a run-of-the-mill MMO to succeed nowadays. Especially with things like Final Fantasy XIV Online that has, lauded for its story and its MMO mechanics. World of Warcraft's still going on. I wouldn't say strong. I don't know off the top of my head if it's doing that well, but it definitely
World of Warcraft
sets itself apart.
World of Warcraft always doing numbers. But it also just the games as a service model entering the AAA landscape and every major publisher wanting a piece of that pie. Like, when you do an MMO, you are also competing with Destiny. You are also competing with the Divisions. You are also competing with Marvel's Avengers. So, like, it's just a thing of, like, you have to be more. You have to do something. You're not marketing for the money anymore. You're marketing for player time, because now time is the currency as opposed to the $60, $70 purchase up front. It's how long can you keep that content coming in and making it interesting and getting people to come on board with it. Because, like, you look at a lot of these different games and services that came in and didn't really catch fire. You look at your Anthems, you look at your Marvel's Avengers, you look at to a much lesser extent Fallout 76, because it seems like Fallout 76, like, Bethesda stuck to it and committed, and it seems to be working out for them now. But, of course, we don't have to talk about how disastrous launch was. So now it's just an argument of, like, all right, you have the IP, Lord of the Rings is big, but do you have the studio that is capable of matching the expectations behind that IP?
I don't know.
I've yet to see evidence to say you have. So, sorry for those who have lost their jobs. Gollum, as a game, unfortunately became the laughingstock of the internet for a few weeks, and it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. It's just such a shame.
And then finally, our final topic before we get into our review today, Connor, what is your final penny of the day?
My most beloved franchise, beloved game, is getting an animated miniseries.
Hey,
Polygon. An Overwatch animated miniseries is streaming this July 6th. I don't know why I said that. The articles say it in a second. Genesis Part 1 Dawn looks like an Overwatch origin story. An Overwatch miniseries is headed to YouTube. The first episode, called Genesis Part 1 Dawn, will be released on July 6th, and Blizzard put up a trailer Friday showing off some of the characters we'll meet. It looks like this particular episode will focus on the original Omnic Crisis, and we see Reaper, Reinhardt, and Ana fighting the war that threatened humanity. In the lore of Overwatch, humanity achieved a near utopia by using Omnics and AI to automate society. That went wrong when the Omnics revolted, kicking off a worldwide war. A security agency called Overwatch proved critical in battling back the Omnics and saving civilians, but the agency would later fall apart due to accusations of corruption and internal division. It also looks like we'll be seeing some scenes from the points of views of both Omnics and the scientists who created them. Presumably, the Omnic at the end of the trailer is heading to Nepal to join the ranks of the Shambhali, an order of Omnic philosophers. We'll have to wait and see what the other 2 episodes of Genesis have in store. Hopefully, they'll move past the origin phase of the Overwatch universe and show us some of what's going on in the present day. Players can also unlock story missions in Overwatch 2 in Season 6 called Invasion. The story missions will cost $15 and they'll be permanently available after the season concludes. The next Overwatch character entering the franchise is a mysterious support class hero with a big sword gun, and we may learn more about the story through her as well.
Who cares?
You see, Tavin, I want to say nobody cares, but people have been asking for story stuff for years and years and years. This is a game that came out in 2016, and almost 10 years later, specifically, now that I do the math in my head, 7 years later, we're finally we got the mission stories that was supposed to be in Overwatch 2 when it came out and wasn't, and now is being charged $15. And now we're getting this mini-series, which I'm acting on unofficial information that might only be 5 minutes long, like a short video, really.
So we're getting the things we were getting when the game launched, but just in a different art style. Great, cool, awesome, sounds fantastic. Like, who cares, man? Like, listen, you had your opportunity years ago to do all of this, and you dropped the ball. You had a great run for a good number of years, but then, Blizzard came down with this wanting a sequel in Overwatch 2 in some way to get more players on board, to, give us a full-fledged out story campaign, which players had been asking for, but you ran that risk of killing the content cycle in your game, of your games as a service like we were just talking about. And so player drop-off was dramatic. Your player base shrunk to a minimal size to just keep it going, really. And then when you did come out, you came out kind of disappointing. Like, the content just wasn't there. And now, like, I just don't see, there is no hunger for this IP anymore. There's no want or care for it. Yeah, we did want this several years ago, but now, times have changed and we've all moved on, and we're all much more excited about every other game coming out, and I think it's just too little too late for Overwatch at this point.
For sure. Yeah. Speaking as a former fan, they would have had me come 2020. If they had brought this around 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe even 2021. But the fact that it's too little, too late.
Yeah. You took really bad bets, and your team wasn't ready for it, and it was just completely handled in the wrong way. And now, we're left with the wreckage, and we're looking around and going, there's nothing left, man. We just don't care.
So sad. This isn't even talking about the sexual harassment stuff, which we brought up multiple times, which also just hurt the will of the company, the goodwill of it. And all of that combined has led to this situation. And
I mean, circle back to our first topic of the day with the FTC versus Microsoft case. We didn't mention Overwatch once. We talked about Call of Duty. We talked about Diablo. We talked about World of Warcraft. We didn't mention Overwatch once. We just forgot. And I think that's like, the key problem here is that the world has forgotten about Overwatch. And I don't know if anybody cares enough to come back to it. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the news segment of the Two Penny Gamescast. We are going to cut into our review for Final Fantasy 16. Don't go anywhere, but remember, you can catch us live Sunday, 4 p.m. Central Time, twitch.tv/2pennygames. You can catch the VOD on youtube.com/@2pennygames, Monday, 8 a.m. Central Time, and mainstream podcast services of your choice. But until next time, have a great time. And Connor, let's talk about some Final Fantasy 16. What's poppin', players? Welcome back to a Two Penny Games review, this time for Final Fantasy 16. I am your host, Tavin Bothel, but I have not really played that much of Final Fantasy 16, so I am joined by my good friend and co-host who's been diving deep into it all week. Say hello to the people, our lead reviewer, Connor Elliott.
Hi, gamers. I played 36 hours of Final Fantasy 16, and I'm here to review it.
You are indeed. For context, I've played fucking maybe 4. Like, I played enough for the B-roll footage that you're seeing on screen, which does not encapsulate all the mechanics of the game. I already know, but there's some fun stuff. There's some action and so forth. Wow, this game is dark in the recording, which is concerning. But anyways, Connor, you are our lead reviewer of Final Fantasy 16. Go ahead, give us, what did you think of Final Fantasy 16?
As arguably my most anticipated game of the year, I can say that it definitely sold itself on me by being an amazing game. I am, like I said before, 36 hours into the game. Haven't beaten the main story yet, though I've been desperately trying to. So as far as what makes Final Fantasy 16 so amazing is, first of all, the combat. It's fluid, it's responsive, it feels fun, it feels good to just take out a wide breadth of enemies using your icon abilities, which the way it's an action adventure game, kind of reminiscent of Devil May Cry, where you have less based on weapons and more based off abilities that you gain throughout the story. It allows you the basic gameplay, the sword gameplay allows you to charge up your attacks, do heavy fireball hits with your sword, do a little bit of air combos, though it's not as extensive as something like Devil May Cry, but enough to make it, freshen up gameplay if you're tired of just going on the ground, using your basically blink ability to teleport right in front of other enemies and start striking them. You can easily just kind of be fighting one big enemy, and then you see, okay, well, this other smaller enemy is going to be coming, giving me some trouble. Let me go take care of him really quickly. And you have an ability known as Phoenix Shift when you start the game, where you just press circle and you can zip over to wherever direction, or to another enemy that's off to the side or wherever. One of the great things about this game also is its story. It's very much influenced by Game of Thrones, taking a more dark, medieval fantasy game, but one that's not, the fantasy elements aren't in the story, are really delegated to the typical Final fantasy-isms that we've come to expect, particularly the monsters. I haven't fought any behemoths yet, but of course one of the main things in the story are that's been marketed up until this point are the icons. Giant beasts that are pretty much seemingly kind of holy figures. It depends on the status of where they are in the world of Alethea, because it's being a political game, of course, is very diverse groups of people. There's the Duchy of Rosleth, the Duchy of Rosleth, that you start off in the game as. You have places like the Republic of Dalmekia, more of the very economical center of the world of Alethea, the typical very religious organization of the Holy Empire of Sambrek, and all of them come together fairly well. Each of them has a nice icon that throughout the story of the game you're kind of building up to fighting up against, because really, if you just look at the marketing of Final Fantasy, the boss fights of the icons and the icons themselves are really foremost amongst this game. A lot of the things that take place in the story are centered around it, since they're basically nukes, this world's equivalent of that, where it's pretty indispensable if your side has one. And since everybody has some, it kind of creates this really nice, tense situation where everyone's kind of equally powered due to having these, massive behemoths on their side that they can deploy basically whenever they want. And I've faced a couple of different icons, or I've done different icon battles. You're not always fighting against icons themselves, but they perform extremely well. The first one being very early in the opening hours of the game, which functions more as what do you call it, Deb? Not the
set piece.
Set piece. Yeah, it's set piece, but it kind of like
the first one. The first one at the beginning of the game is more like
Star Fox gameplay,
like just kind of cinematic visual flair, like just to kind of like get you interested into the world. Like it's not mechanically very dense.
It's not until the next one, which comes into play, where it starts to acclimate you to the powers of your icon Ifrit, which it's really interesting because when you first play it, he's very slow and sluggish and super powerful, and it really gives you a lot of weight to the hits. And you first are like, okay, I don't know how they're exactly going to build off of this style of gameplay with the icons, because it's a lot more, like I said, slower than your base gameplay is, which makes sense considering the size and the power of the moves that you're doing. But that's only for plot reasons. Else after that point, he becomes extremely fluid, fast-paced, and it completely gives you expectations of how these icon fights are going to be, and then changes them. And it really changes them based off of the enemy that you're fighting. One of the first ones you fight is a very mobile enemy, so you're trying to overcome it with your slow-moving character. Whereas is the next icon fight, it's one where it's the same kind of situation, but now you have the mobility, and it's trying to get you acclimated to the mobility of your icon abilities. And then the following fight, it's more, obviously you have to get up close to your opponent, but it's not a fast-moving one where trying to control spacing is a big element of it. And by that point, you've already gotten acclimated to what the gameplay is supposed to feel like as an icon, so it turns into this hard-hitting action game that's able to translate how you feel on the ground in normal gameplay, but give it a fresh breath of air through new abilities to your icon abilities and through your icon powers and creating set pieces. It's a very much cinematic. It's a very cinematic game, even to the point where you have QuickTime events, which haven't happened in a long time. And some people might have issue with that, and I understand why. People kind of see it as being very surface level, very bland. But this one, it uses it sparingly, and it's a way to kind of pacing up the combat, because you don't do massive amounts of damage in these boss fights, but those cinematics allow you to sometimes just do large chunks of health that get through the fight quicker and add that cinematic flair to it. I do have some, going back to the base combat though, which I kind of touched on it before about how you get other icon abilities. This one is very similar. As you go through the game, do the story, you gain the ability to use other icons that can be cycled out just with the press of L2. You can have 3 stocked up at any point in time. Each of them has 2 abilities, usually ones that are they're on a recharge period, and they generally do either large amounts of just base damage or stagger damage, which a lot of the gameplay, since I didn't mention it before, kind of wants you to stagger your opponent so that you can open them up to doing whatever abilities you have and not having to time them at all, just focus entirely on damage output, because the enemies are kind of spongy. They can take a lot of hits, but that kind of feeds into the main criticism I have of the combat, which is that old Final Fantasy games are very focused around the party. This is one of those that's more action-adventure than past entries have been. 15 kind of established that, set the groundwork for it. 16 just pushed that a little bit further. And the issue that it kind of came across was it was so focused on making Clive feel really good and playing with him and his in-depth mechanics, that when you have party members in, you have very limited control over your dog, which works out. But then you have another character that usually comes in and helps you along the way, and both of those characters, you don't control the other one. They function on an AI system, but they have no health bar. They can't be taken out of the game in any way. So combat encounters are very easy at a certain point. I've heard some takes of people who have beaten the game and have gotten on New Game Plus saying that the challenge spikes upwards, but the base game just doesn't have that difficulty. So at a certain point, if the combat system on its own isn't already super difficult to get a grasp of, so you're already getting it down pretty quickly. And then when it throws you more icon abilities and not really throwing you enemies that, attack you in a smart way because of those party members that you have, because they don't have health, they can take care of, the smaller enemies if you're trying to take the big guy out. And then inevitably they're going to be able to, because they're efficient at AI, they're able to take out the other smaller enemies and then join you in ganging up on this big guy. Where if they just added a health-based system, they can actually, you would be more incentivized to turn away from your big enemy opponent and go and help your teammates that are distracting the enemies but are inevitably going to lose those fights because they aren't moving around and dodging attacks the same way you are. And so unfortunately, that has consistently been the underlying issue with this game, is I'm just not being challenged, like at all. And even though some people might say that I could not use some of the icon abilities to make fights go by a little bit slower, it should be accommodating those things rather than having you throw them out in sake of just being fighting more difficult enemies. Especially because I said that other people have said that the difficulty hikes up post-game. And so I don't know why they couldn't just have that kind of scaling of difficulty in the base game through your first experience, because it is a long game. I'm 36 hours in, as I've said before, and I'm still in Act 2. And I haven't really done many side quests or extra content, which, to get to that, they have some pretty interesting ones and some pretty bad ones. So there's the basic side quests that are denoted by an exclamation point. Those are almost always just the most generic, basic fetch quests. You go kill this enemy, get the item he drops, and then go back and turn it in, maybe for some kind of reward, usually just in the form of XP. but they're not really interesting, especially coming off the back of Yakuza 0, which I've been playing this past month, whose side quests are exceptional and feel incredibly unique, each one. I like them a lot. But these ones are just so the epitome of boring, generic side quests that infest a lot of other games that are unfortunately infesting this one as well. Though, that being said, there are special side quests that are denoted by a plus that usually have better benefits and are more interesting, either from a character perspective or from a mission perspective of what exactly it is you're doing in those. And sometimes what those tie into are monster hunts, which is a separate thing in and of itself, where you have a job board of monsters that are terrorizing the land, and you can go and accept them, find the enemy that it is, who are generally always going to be tougher than normal enemies, even if they're the same variety of other enemies that you fought up until that point, and gain renown specifically, which you can cash in for any kind of extra rewards, sometimes extra equipment, extra ability points, crafting equipment so you can upgrade and create new weapons, new armor, new items as they're called, which unfortunately once again falls victim to something that a lot of other games nowadays do, which is like, oh, it does +3 to your defense and +8 to your damage or something like that, and it's like, oh, well, that doesn't really, I don't feel it changing anything. It doesn't even have a aesthetic purpose. It's just entirely a point system that you can't really tell affecting you because
number went up.
Yes, number went up for a game that already is easy as it is. So sometimes I'm even incentivized to not want to get new equipment because I'm just like, well, I'm already having an easy time as it is. If I just get a better weapon, I'm going to stick with that. But unfortunately, the weapons can look cool and they change. So I have that kind of weird desire to constantly get new weapons. The politics of the story are interesting, but it's not so heavy as I thought it was going in, because many other reviews have touched on that the third act of the game kind of just tosses those all out to the side in favor of the more traditional Final Fantasy elements, which I won't, for story purposes, spoil anything, but it can get kind of weird. And I'm expecting that to happen, but it's because it's set it up pretty well. Like, it doesn't seem to misguide you. Like, it's setting you up for a solely political game and then change the game on you. It's very much seen from a mile away, even if I didn't see other reviews denoting as such. And that's helped along by the fact that even though the politics are interesting and the characters within them are as well, it's not like Game of Thrones in the sense where that's really the crux of why you're playing this game. It's more character focused than politics focused. That's mainly the big points that I can cover at the moment.
There we go.
What's been your experience?
So yeah, again, I'm very, very early. The B-roll you're seeing in front of you is the majority of what I've played so far. And I've been jumping around to some of the more action bits of that B-roll because it did start with me running around the main base and like accepting the smaller side quests, which it's unfortunate to hear that most of them are like just kind of like whatever, but there are some really cool ones. So I'm excited to look into those. Overall, my early impressions are aligning pretty much exactly with what you just said, where the combat is fun, it's simple, flashy, it does engage the brain, but it does seem to be a little, at its base, a little simple and easy. I could see if like damage numbers started going up higher from the enemies, that like it could provide a challenge, but at the same time, like just the way that all of the systems kind of work together, I don't foresee myself having a lot of issues in this game. To get into the nitty gritty of that, the dodge versus the parry, I have not found the timing for the parries. I've been dodging everything. Is that kind of your experience as well, or do you parry a fair amount?
No, I definitely dodge more. Parry, it's something that you give. I get the timing down now, but overall, it's I'm already doing so much damage and such that I never feel much of an incentive to use the parry unless I want to feel cool or interrupt some big. Its main purpose to me is to interrupt the big attacks that some enemies do, because you can parry those, and dodging them can just kind of slow down the fight. Once again, going back to the difficulty of it, particularly with your allies who just do damage with really no negatives whatsoever. You're dominating every enemy that you come across.
It has felt that like even if I'm in an encounter with a stronger enemy, if I just pull back for a little while, like just like evade the entire fight, it feels like I could just like not interact with the fight, and the fight would still like end in a victory to that point. A lot of like the like collectible things that you're getting, like crafting materials and stuff. I have not yet seen how that is useful. And it just, to me, it just feels like, hey man, we're here for the flashy combat. It's engaging enough to where like you can't like turn your brain off, but like you don't have to think very hard when doing this. This is not like a FromSoft game, or even like Final Fantasy VII Remake required more thought and knowledge of mechanics than what I'm seeing here. So I think this game is so far fun to play and good, and I want to see it through. But if it is as you say, is the mechanics don't like get too much more interesting, I don't know if it's going to carry me through the entire story. But I will say the story is good so far. I've liked the story quite a bit.
It's written well, and it consistently is the dialogue. The relations between the characters is one of the more interesting parts of the game. One of the main allies that you have, I've kind of prevented saying her name, but it's kind of almost public knowledge at this point for anyone that's focused on this game a little bit. It's a character named Jill, a childhood friend of the main character. Their relationship is great. You know, it reminds a lot of people of me included of like Tifa and Cloud, childhood friends that kind of have that have emotions for one another, but they don't exactly, you know, share them in a romantically intimate way, but in an intimate way, like as very, very, very close friends would be. Torgal's just a nice companion. The voice acting is pretty great. Particularly Sid, one of the characters that you meet early on. He's a famous actor, the person who plays that character's voice. So, you know, he does a great job as well. Dion, one of the princes of Sambrek, came out of nowhere being a good character. Like, they do some things with him that, especially for a JRPG, I was surprised at. I'll hold off saying what that means, but I think when you first start getting acclimated to that character, introduced to them, you'll know what I mean. Like, almost instantly. But I'm really worried about one other thing, which is the villain. Like I said, it's going to end up in a very obvious Final Fantasy way near the end. But there's a character who functions more as a common villain from the beginning of the game to now, who has done way more than the main villain has done the few times that we've seen the main villain. This other character, I'm not going to say any names, it's just like you just hate this person. Whenever they pop up on screen, it does a really good job of just making that emotion of hate rise within you, because it's just a unapologetically evil person, but someone who's believably evil. They're not so just, ooh, I'm, you know, the cackling, you know, evil mastermind in my tower. They are that, but their motivations are just so disgustingly, you know, evil, but in a realistic way, especially given the setting of the world.
And I did text you early on when I was playing. I was honestly surprised at how well written it is. Like, and I'm talking moment to moment dialogue. I don't know if this is due to the localization team or like the original writings of the Square Enix team, but you just kind of believe everything, which is something that like doesn't always translate very well. For example, Final Fantasy VII Remake is well written, but I would argue it's not the best localized, because there's a lot of moments where like a character kind of grunts, or there's an awkward pause, or somebody says something that maybe in Japanese culture that's cool, but here it just kind of comes off as awkward. That there's none of that here in my early hours, where it's just like constantly like characters are reacting appropriately. Like it feels like everybody is like, it feels like a Western game essentially. And I think that was a lot of their intention with just crafting the game, from combat styles to the political aspect of it, to just sort of how the story unfolds in itself and the drama of it. It feels very Western. And I'm of two minds of that personally, because in my early hours, I was excited more by Final Fantasy VII Remake than I have been by 16 here. And this is a cool place for the franchise to explore and to be in, but it is not one that I want the franchise to make its main gameplay centered around.
I agree.
How you agree? You're with that?
Yeah, it's a lot of what has to just go back to the combat. Final Fantasy VII Remake is something that I thought it would take a lot more inspiration from. One where there is a lot more active fighting, but you're going to take hits. So your kind of goal is to minimize that as much as you possibly can, but you're never going to be able to escape it. This way, in this game, similar to 15, I feel like it's, as you said, it's very easy just to dodge the enemy's attacks. That's kind of the core of it. The dodge mechanics just seem too good. And so, once again, I guess I could just not use the dodge mechanic and try and just rely on the parry, because it does make you feel cool, and it is effective at just getting in a lot of damage. But I don't want to limit myself for how I play the game when it could have just been done better right out the gate.
Yeah, it's like a weird thing where, like, even though 7 Remake was an action game, sure, but like there were still moments of that game where if you were not paying attention, like things still kind of played out almost in a turn-based style. With how the ATB system worked and like how you would see your enemies charge up attacks that you knew were going to be very dangerous, and you had to get away and you know, manage your party in that sense. Here, it just kind of feels like I can just press what's the dodge button? R1. I can just press R1 all the time or whenever I want. I can just mash it and be safe and fine. It doesn't feel like the onus is on me as a player to really learn the systems. It feels like it's sort of like aiming for the lowest. What is the like it's focused on the like the lower, like the what is the words I'm looking for? Like the lower tier player. Like it's trying to be more general in that, and it's lowered the skill floor and the skill ceiling like dramatically.
I think what could have fixed that is a difficulty setting right off the bat, because it just kind of there's no hard mode, I should say.
Yeah,
it doesn't allow
they
you
just
to
throw you in, right?
There's one where it makes it easier, and the one that makes it like more focused on like a balance between gameplay and story.
And then even in that, they give you items to make the game easier.
They do, yes. Which that's all you kind of really needed to do, instead of adding a whole not like easy and very easy mode, and then extremely easy. It seems to be the main options that you have because of those rings. And to your point earlier about like, just because I don't want to forget about it, localization, how this game just does that a lot better. Mm-hmm. One of the weird things about this game that I found out after the fact is that the lip syncing does not, the lips aren't synced in the Japanese version of the game. So it's primarily a game where you're doing it in English. Like, it was made for that English audience, as you said, like how they acclimated the gameplay to be more action adventure, which I like in this game. I just don't want them to do it in further Final Fantasies.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I like this game. I want to keep playing it. I just don't think it's like, even like a Witcher 3 is deeper than, like, way deeper than this. And I think that's the thing, is like this game just isn't much of an RPG. Like, yes, you're playing the role of Clive, and yes, it's called Final Fantasy, and yes, you know, you end a battle and you level up and all of your numbers go up, but like, there's nothing like the materia system, or like how you were saying, like the armor and weapon system, like, doesn't really, like, it's not super in-depth. Like, you can't plan it out. You can't really adjust the settings of your party. And, you know, you're not, like, unlocking abilities in the sense of, like, oh, like, now I've got this whole, like, tree of upgrades that I can do. It's literally just, like, a circle, and you go, all right, now I can do this move, now I can do this move, now I can do this. It's that critique I have of some games where it's like, oh, it's not that I didn't, it's not that I'm leveling up and getting stronger or creating a build. It's just you were limiting my options as a player until you decided it's time for me to have those options again. Which kind of annoys me, because it makes the game less replayable in my mind, because then it's like I can't do the dodges or I can't do the specific attacks that I want to do until I hit a certain point in the narrative, or I hit a certain point of grinding out XP and stuff like that. So it's just like, man, like this, like, I like this game. I think it's going to be a great action adventure game, but the reason action adventure games are usually 10 to 15 hours, 20 hours, you know, sometimes long, is because they know their gameplay loop can't sustain the 40, 50, 60, 80 hour adventures that RPGs typically do. And for this one to have that length of gameplay, or that length of runtime with this level of gameplay, it's like, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the end of this.
Mm-hmm. I agree, especially when you factor in that it doesn't even have like the ability to take advantage of elemental differences. I don't feel like electricity does more against
There's no like rock paper scissors to it.
Yes, there's no. Yeah, it's kind of just different flavors that it gives you with like your ranged attacks or your like I said, your icon abilities, which have the flair of whatever icon the element is represented there, and it does damage. It does work, but it doesn't have that extra level of detail.
It just feels like all right, this move does more damage.
Yeah.
Like the number is just higher with this move. And it's like, to your point, like, the first econ you get is fire. You're not setting dudes on fire. You're not, like, burning them up or anything. It doesn't look like they're reacting to the fire. They're just taking damage. And I'm like, all right. Okay, so these are just damage sponge enemies that I want to stagger them up so that they can take more damage. And it's just like, how much damage can I output in a flashy way? Which is fun. Don't get me wrong. It's fun, and it feels good to play. But it's just like, will this last 40 hours? I don't know.
I would say it definitely is entertaining me, and I think it's going to keep my attention until the end. But it's as you said, I don't really have much of an incentive already to go back to it. Yeah. Even though knowing it's going to be harder, it's like, I should have just gotten that from the get-go, rather than having to play it again to get the more refined experience that I want.
Yeah, and it was like, and to bring the comparison back to 7 Remake, like, there were difficulty spikes in that game that like made you go, oh shit, I have to like pay attention in this fight. I can't just like hack and slash my way through it like I've done so many others. I have to pay attention during the Bahamut fight at the end, or during the different like mechs you fight throughout the game, or the Turk fights or something like that. Like, you have to pay attention and use every element of the mechanics. And then when you do unlock hard mode after you beat the game on normal, it's not only that it's a difficulty spike, the game plays in a dramatically different way in 7 Remake. It's not just damage numbers going up. It's characters will have different moves, or the sort of like weaknesses and strengths will be amplified. So now you really want to play into the different uses of your materias and so forth. Whereas this, I honestly just feel like it's like, all right, 40 hours of mashing square and triangle until and occasionally hitting R1 to dodge, and then another 40 hours of doing that but a little bit longer each time.
Mm-hmm. It just doesn't work as well in the long run. But
yeah.
I feel unfair of constantly saying, like, bringing up Final Fantasy VII Remake, because it's hard not to, because it's so recent, and because it had gameplay elements that I would hoped would have been more implemented here, particularly how you manage your party. So I think you should have just stuck with Clive, of course. There's no reason to be able to play as Torgal or Jill. Clive is he just needs to have to do other things than just beyond focusing on a single enemy and getting a stagger meter down and doing massive amounts of damage to him.
But again, if we were managing party members like how we did in 7 Remake, or if it was more simple of like telling Sid, hey, get aggressive here. Get aggressive right now. Or hey, Sid, be on defense right now because your health is low. Or Jill, I'm assuming Jill becomes the healer role. Jill, focus healing Sid, not me. Like, or focus healing yourself. Or Jill, run back and do something. Like, if it was something like that. And these are still commands that can be tied to the D-pad, like they have with the dog or with the use of items. But with the dog, it's literally just like, all right, occasionally I just press up or down to like make the dog do one specific flashy move, or make him heal me or something like that. So it's just like, is this actually control, or is he just another item? You know, it doesn't feel like a character. It feels like I'm using items, and that's not as engaging as as other options that we could have gone here. So, like, again, I'm at least glad that they're willing to experiment with the formula. And if there's one thing you can say about Final Fantasy, they've always been willing to experiment with the formula. This is just not something
MMOs.
Yeah, literally. This is just not something I would like to see for a Final Fantasy 17. And I don't want the success of this game to affect what would be Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3.
Yeah, and hopefully, I don't think it will, especially because the development team seems to be separate in that regard for what they're trying to make. But I'm really itching to get back to the story and to continue playing the fun combat, particularly the icon fights, which, like I said, that's some of the best boss fights I've had in recent years. They're very, very good and feel good to play.
Yeah,
and I know I'm probably not even at the best ones yet.
Yeah, but I'll say this is like to the benefit of the story. Like I'm itching to find out. There's the inciting incident of the game happens in the first 2 hours or whatever, and Clive's interpretation of that incident is very different than what actually happened, and I'm itching to find out what happens when he discovers the truth. Like I really want to see what happens when he finds out. So like if they can continue that loop, that hook of like, this is really interesting, can't wait for the characters to discover this, or wow, this is interesting and I'm discovering it at the same time as the characters, like that level of surprise and writing in it, and the heart and the emotions you feel from it, that could be enough to carry me through the game, even though like the combat system like isn't deep enough to do it itself.
Yeah, thankfully, like I said, the plot, the world building, because the world of Alethea is also very interesting. How not the economy, how the society is set up, how it functions. Culture, yeah. It gets an emotional response out of me, particularly in regards to the bearers, which are slaves. Slaves that people who are born with the ability to use magic, and so they are used as slave labor. And it genuinely just kind of, like, you see a very stark difference between how they treat, like, you see someone who have like a nice personality to you, but then when it's toward a bearer, instantly it changes and they become vitriolic and evil.
Bringing that up specifically, the game has been criticized by a couple of people for not having a very visually diverse cast to it. Like everybody's white. When we start discussing these social elements in it and how they apply to the real world, and I understand the argument is like, oh, but it's all European like stylings or whatever. But like, okay, but Europeans did fucked up shit to people of color, so like. We can't just like use that as an excuse every time. And in a game called Final Fantasy, and we're doing dragons and phoenixes and magic and all of this, how do you feel about the choice to pretty much exclude people of color in this?
Yeah, going back to the bearers, the slave labor, I think that's really the core reason of why they didn't want to do it. I think most people would have been able to have that in the game and be reasonable and be smart about it, knowing that they're not trying to make some grand statement about slavery. But I think it was them just trying to avoid, because it's a Japanese company at the end of the day. They're not like
if they
American
mishandle
companies.
that's worse than the criticisms they're getting here.
Yeah, and so I think they made the correct decision from their perspective of not having people of color in the game. But at the same time, I think it would have been completely fine to have them in there. But I get why they didn't. I think it would have been better to be a bit more honest rather than say, oh, it's a medieval European setting, because it is, of course, at the end of the day, a fantasy game, a Final Fantasy game. Yeah. And that shouldn't really hold that much weight in the race of the characters. But I think they had enough reason not to do it.
You could have just detached real world race politics from your in-universe race politics. Like the slaves you said are magic users. So like, why can't we have black or Asian non-magic users and magic users, to where like we sort of detach race from that conversation, but still get our representation that everybody would like. These are things that I'm just throwing out there as ideas. Like I don't necessarily feel strongly one way or the other, but we're two white guys.
Yeah, take that what you will.
Yeah. Oh, there was something else, but I've forgotten it now. Oh, the active, what do they call it? The active timeline thing, or
yes.
the lore tracker or whatever the thing, where it's very much like if you've ever like watched anything on Amazon Prime when you pause it and it brings up like the actors like little like bio or whatever. This game has that, and it like actively updates as you progress and stuff, and it plays to the characters in the scene and bases like as the story progresses, that information changes and so forth. Like I love that. That's really well done.
Do too.
That and it even must have taken so much work to do.
It tells you information that you otherwise wouldn't have known if you didn't look. It's not need to know information, but it's things that get you a better understanding of the character. Or if you like, okay, who is this guy again? What's their relation to? Oh, okay, that's the role they play in this world. And sometimes you just need those little fresh, hints. And because it updates it in the middle of cutscenes, a character will come in and I'll be like, I've seen this character before. I just can't remember like who were they serving? And I pause it and it's like, oh yeah, there he is. Oh, okay, yeah, that's what he does. Okay, good to know. It's just very a nice little addition.
Yeah, that's really nice. I really like that. So, Connor, is there anything else you want to mention about Final Fantasy 16 before we wrap it up here, sir?
I think we exhausted it.
There we go. Final Fantasy 16, good game. Oh, we had a conversation, I believe, on the Piggy Bank, which you can catch next week on youtube.com/@2pennygames at Saturday, 8 a.m. I had the theory that depending on the success of games like Starfield, there's really 3 big contenders for Game of the Year so far, and that being obviously Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, hopefully Starfield, and it seems like this one, Final Fantasy 16. Where do you think all of this lands in that conversation?
It's strange. I would consider Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, a masterpiece, but ultimately that's a large part of that is because they added on all these other different systems that just enhanced the original Breath of the Wild experience while retaining that same thing. But this one just does, even though that's interesting, unique, new, this one's from the ground up is different. It's not like it has an equivalent. Maybe it takes some inspirations from Final Fantasy 15, some with 7 Remake, but it's more of a unique game that, even though I would say isn't as good at the core of it as Tears of the Kingdom, I'm more impressed with it this year.
It's more exciting.
I think it's more exciting. So on my top 10 list, it's probably going to go. I always decide at the end of the year, though, because I'm still just playing this now. Of course, who knows if I'll think the same thing a month from later. But for right now, I'm enjoying playing this game more than Tears of the Kingdom. So I would put it up higher. And Starfield still has that potential of being a really interesting open world game, or not being that. So I'll have to see how that one plays out. And of course, Baldur's Gate 3 is the other big contender for myself, the RPG fan that I am.
Yeah.
So wait and see.
Wait and see, indeed. I mean, in terms of just Game of the Year conversations as a whole, I would like to include Spider-Man 2 in there, but I feel like Spider-Man 2 is just going to be more Spider-Man, and we kind of know what that is, and Spider-Man wasn't Game of the Year in the year that it came out. So this year being, I would argue, one of, if not the best years in gaming ever, I would say this game probably, or Spider-Man 2 just doesn't really have a solid shot, which is unfortunate because I'm sure it's going to be a banger. But
it could.
Yeah, so I'm very, very, I'm excited to play more. And your review sort of solidified what my expectations were from early on. Like, I don't think I'm going to hit hour 10 and suddenly, like, it's going to click or change or anything. But I do think, what I've felt so far is going to continue. And that's a good thing because I felt mostly good things about the game. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for your Final Fantasy 16 review. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Ring off in the comments how you felt about Final Fantasy 16, and keep an eye out for the YouTube short/TikTok version of the game. Until next time, have a great time, and Connor, say goodbye to the people.
See you later.